The death threat arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under her apartment door like a poisonous snake. 3 words scrawled in red ink: quit or die. Sarah Martinez stared at the paper, her coffee growing cold as she read those words for the 5th time. Most women would have packed their bags and disappeared. Most women would have called the police, changed their names, moved across the country. Sarah Martinez was not most women. She folded the threat carefully, placed it in her desk drawer next to 4 others just like it, and laced up her running shoes. In 6 months, she would be standing on a rooftop in Afghanistan, crosshairs steady on a target 800 meters away, about to make a shot that would save the lives of 12 captured soldiers. The men who tried to break her spirit with threats had no idea they were forging the deadliest female sniper in Navy SEAL history. This is the story of how intimidation became inspiration, how fear transformed into fury, and how a young woman from the wrong side of Phoenix turned death threats into a license to kill for her country. But Sarah's journey to becoming an elite warrior didn't begin with that first threat. It started years earlier, in a place where survival was already a daily battle, and weakness meant becoming prey. Some people are born fighters. Others have fighting thrust upon them. Sarah Martinez discovered she was both. The summer heat in Phoenix was merciless, but it was nothing compared to the fire that burned inside Sarah Martinez as she watched her younger brother Carlos limp home with a black eye and torn shirt. At 15, she had already learned that the world was divided into predators and prey, and she was determined that neither she nor her family would ever be victims. Their neighborhood was a war zone disguised as suburbia. Drug dealers controlled the corners, gang members marked their territory with graffiti and violence, and police sirens were the soundtrack of daily life. Sarah's mother, Elena, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and rent paid, leaving Sarah to protect Carlos and their younger sister, Maria, who was only 8 years old. "Who did this to you?" Sarah demanded, lifting Carlos's chin to examine his bruised face. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled with rage. "The Serpientes," Carlos whispered, using the Spanish name for the local gang that terrorized kids for lunch money and respect. "They said next time they want $20, or they'll do worse." Sarah's jaw tightened. $20 might as well have been $20,000 in their household. Her mother's paychecks barely covered basic necessities, and there was nothing left over for extortion payments to teenage thugs who thought violence made them powerful. That night, as her siblings slept, Sarah sat at their kitchen table with a notebook and began planning. She wrote down everything she knew about the Serpientes, their routines, their weaknesses, their fears. She had been watching them for years, noting how they operated, when they struck, who they targeted. Most importantly, she observed that they only picked on victims who wouldn't fight back. The next morning, Sarah walked Carlos to school, but instead of heading to her own classes, she took a detour to the community center, where she had heard about a self-defense class. The instructor, a retired Marine named Sergeant Rodriguez, looked skeptical when this thin teenage girl asked to join a program designed for adults. "You sure about this, mija?" he asked, using the affectionate Spanish term for daughter. "This isn't a game. We teach real combat techniques here." "I'm sure," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Teach me everything." Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that day, a determination that reminded him of the best soldiers he had served with. Against his better judgment, he agreed to train her, but only if she committed to showing up every day and following his instructions without question. For the next 6 months, Sarah lived a double life. During school hours, she was a quiet student who kept her head down and her grades up. After school, she transformed into a warrior in training. Rodriguez taught her hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, tactical thinking, and most importantly, the mindset of a fighter. "Fighting isn't about being the strongest or the fastest," Rodriguez explained as Sarah practiced her stance. "It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters to you. It's about never giving up, even when everything seems hopeless." Sarah absorbed every lesson like a sponge. She learned how to strike pressure points that would disable an attacker instantly. She mastered knife defense techniques and studied the psychology of bullies and predators. Rodriguez was amazed at her natural ability and her relentless work ethic. "You fight like someone who has everything to lose," he told her one afternoon after she had successfully defended against 3 simulated attackers. "Because I do," Sarah replied, thinking of Carlos and Maria waiting for her at home. The transformation wasn't just physical. As Sarah grew stronger and more confident, her presence began to change the dynamic in their neighborhood. Other kids started looking up to her, and even some of the gang members began treating her with grudging respect. She never started fights, but she never backed down from them either. The real test came on a cold December evening when Sarah was walking home from the community center. She turned the corner onto her street and saw 3 Serpientes members cornering Carlos and 2 of his friends near the playground. The gang members were older and bigger, and they had Carlos pressed against the chain-link fence. "Time to pay up, little boy," one of them sneered, holding out his hand expectantly. "And the price has gone up. $50 or your sister gets a visit too." Sarah felt something cold and deadly settle in her chest. These predators had just made their biggest mistake by threatening her family in front of witnesses. She approached slowly, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing controlled exactly as Rodriguez had taught her. "There's a problem with your collection methods," she said calmly, causing all three gang members to turn toward her. The leader, a 17-year-old named Miguel who had a reputation for violence, laughed mockingly. "Look what we have here. The little princess thinks she can save her baby brother." "I'm not here to save anyone," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a new authority that made even Miguel pause. "I'm here to deliver a message." What happened next became legendary in their neighborhood. Sarah moved with precision and speed that shocked everyone watching. In less than 30 seconds, two gang members were on the ground, one clutching his wrist and the other gasping for air. Miguel found himself flat on his back with Sarah's knee pressed against his throat. "The message is simple," she said, applying just enough pressure to make him understand she was serious. "My family is off limits. My friends are off limits. This playground is off limits. If you want to be predators, find prey somewhere else." Miguel tried to speak, but Sarah increased the pressure slightly. "Nod, if you understand." He nodded frantically. "Good, because if I have to deliver this message again, I won't be this polite." Sarah released him and stepped back, watching as the three gang members scrambled to their feet and retreated without another word. Carlos stared at his sister with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How did you learn to do that?" he asked. "By deciding I was tired of being afraid," Sarah answered. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. Within a week, the Serpientes had moved their operations to a different area, and other local gang members began avoiding Sarah's family entirely. But more importantly, other kids began approaching Sarah for help and advice. She realized she had discovered something powerful, the ability to use strength to protect the innocent rather than prey on the weak. Rodriguez noticed the change in Sarah immediately during their next training session. There was a new confidence in her movements, a certainty that hadn't been there before. "You've seen real combat now," he observed as they practiced tactical scenarios. "It felt different than I expected," Sarah admitted. "More focused, less emotional." "That's because you're a natural warrior," Rodriguez said. "You have the ability to remain calm under pressure while still being willing to do what needs to be done. That's rare." As her reputation grew, Sarah began receiving requests for help from other families in similar situations. Parents whose children were being bullied, store owners dealing with protection rackets, elderly residents afraid to leave their homes after dark. Sarah couldn't help everyone, but she helped who she could, always using the minimum force necessary and always focusing on protection rather than revenge. Her grades remained excellent despite her new responsibilities, and she began researching military academies and special forces programs. Rodriguez had planted seeds of ambition in her mind, describing his experiences in elite military units and the opportunities available to warriors who were willing to serve their country. "The military could use someone like you," he told her one evening as they cleaned weapons after training. "You have the physical skills, the mental toughness, and the moral compass. But more than that, you understand what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." Sarah began dreaming of a future beyond their neighborhood, a future where she could use her abilities to protect people on a larger scale. She researched Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, and other elite units that might welcome a fighter with her background and determination. But first, she had to survive high school and keep her family safe in an environment that was growing more dangerous by the month. New gangs were moving into the area, drug violence was escalating, and the police seemed either unwilling or unable to provide real protection for residents. The threats began arriving during Sarah's junior year. At first, they were subtle. Anonymous notes warning her to mind her own business, spray-painted messages on walls near her home, whispered warnings from classmates who had heard rumors about plans to teach the Martinez girl a lesson. Sarah documented everything, just as she had learned to do when studying the Serpientes. She mapped patterns, identified sources, and prepared for escalation. Rodriguez helped her develop security protocols for her family and taught her advanced surveillance detection techniques. "They're testing you," he explained as they reviewed the latest batch of threats. "They want to see if intimidation will work where direct confrontation failed." "It won't," Sarah replied with quiet certainty. The first serious attempt came on a Friday night in March. Sarah was walking home from Rodriguez's training session when she noticed she was being followed by two men in a dark sedan. She led them on a circuitous route through the neighborhood, using reflective surfaces to observe their movements and confirming they were definitely tracking her. Instead of going home and potentially endangering her family, Sarah led her pursuers to the community center where Rodriguez was still working late. She entered through the back door and found him in his office reviewing training plans. "I've got company," she said simply. Rodriguez looked up immediately, recognizing the tone that meant serious trouble. "How many?" "Two in a car. They've been following me for 15 minutes. Rodriguez moved to the window and spotted the sedan parked across the street. "Stay here." He returned 5 minutes later with a grim expression. "They drove off when they saw me come outside." "But Sarah, this is escalating beyond neighborhood gang nonsense. These were adults, professionals." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Professional intimidation meant she had attracted the attention of people with real power and resources. "What do you think they want? They want you to disappear. Your reputation is interfering with their business model. Fear and intimidation only work when there's no one willing to stand up to them." That night, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her entire life. She was 16 years old, still in high school, but she was tired of being reactive. It was time to take control of her destiny and use her abilities for something that mattered on a larger scale. She began researching military recruitment options and discovered that she could take the ASVAB test early. If she scored high enough, she could potentially secure early enlistment with guaranteed training and specialized programs. The military offered structure, advanced training, and most importantly, a chance to fight for something bigger than just her neighborhood. But first, she had to make sure her family would be safe in her absence. Over the next few months, Sarah worked with Rodriguez to establish a network of protection for Carlos and Maria. She trained several other neighborhood kids in basic self-defense, creating a support system that could function without her direct involvement. The threats continued, but they also evolved. Someone had clearly done research on Sarah's background and ambitions, because the messages became more specific and more personal. They mentioned her siblings by name, her mother's work schedule, and even her plans for military service. "We know where you're going," read one note that arrived just days before her ASVAB test. "We know who you care about. Some problems can't be solved by running away to play soldier." Sarah stared at the note for a long time, feeling a cold fury building in her chest. These people had made a fundamental miscalculation. They thought military service was an escape, a way for her to run away from her problems. They had no idea that she was running towards something infinitely more dangerous for people like them. She took the ASVAB test 3 weeks later and scored in the 99th percentile. Military recruiters began calling immediately, offering programs in intelligence, special operations, and advanced combat training. Sarah listened to all of them, but she had already made her decision. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. The recruiter laughed when she told him her goal. "Young lady, women can't become SEALs. That program is only open to men." "Then change the rules," Sarah replied calmly, "because I'm going to keep trying until you do." She graduated high school as valedictorian and enlisted in the Navy with guaranteed training in special warfare programs. The day before she left for basic training, another threat arrived at her home. This one was different from the others. Instead of vague intimidation, it was a specific promise. "Run away to the military if you want. We'll be waiting when you get back. And while you're gone, we'll make sure your family knows the price of your arrogance." Sarah read the threat twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in her pack along with all the others. These people had just given her the motivation she would need to excel in the most demanding military training on Earth. They thought they were breaking her spirit, but they were actually forging it into something harder than steel. As her bus pulled away from Phoenix, Sarah looked back at her neighborhood one last time. She was leaving as a teenager who had learned to fight for survival. She would return as something far more dangerous, a professionally trained warrior with the backing of the United States military and the skills to neutralize threats permanently and legally. The men who had tried to intimidate her into submission had unknowingly created their own worst nightmare. Sarah Martinez was going to war, and she was going to learn from the best in the world. When she came home, the balance of power in their little corner of Phoenix was going to shift permanently in her favor. Navy boot camp was supposed to break recruits down and build them back up as sailors. For Sarah Martinez, it felt like a vacation compared to surviving her neighborhood in Phoenix. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands, sleep deprivation, and constant pressure from drill instructors, Sarah thrived in an environment where the rules were clear and following them led to predictable results. Petty Officer First Class Williams, her company commander, noticed Sarah's exceptional performance immediately. She maxed out every physical fitness test, scored perfectly on written exams, and demonstrated leadership qualities that impressed even veteran instructors. But what really caught Williams' attention was her complete lack of fear during combat training exercises. Martinez, Williams barked during a particularly grueling obstacle course run. Why aren't you tired? Because this is easier than real life, Petty Officer, Sarah replied without breaking stride. Williams studied her service record that night and discovered the neighborhood Sarah had grown up in. He made some phone calls and learned about her reputation as a local protector and her training with Sergeant Rodriguez. The next morning, he pulled her aside for a private conversation. I've been in the Navy for 26 years, Williams said. I've seen recruits from every background imaginable, but you're different. You're not here to escape something. You're here to become something. Yes, Petty Officer. I'm going to make some recommendations when you graduate. There are programs available for sailors with your potential, but they require a level of commitment that destroys most people who attempt them. Sarah met his eyes steadily. I'm not most people, Petty Officer. William smiled grimly. No, you're not. True to his word, Williams submitted paperwork that opened doors Sarah hadn't even known existed. Upon graduating boot camp, as company honor graduate, she received orders to attend Navy Special Warfare Preparatory School. It was a stepping stone program designed to prepare candidates for SEAL training, even though women were still officially barred from that elite unit. The preparatory school was located in Great Lakes, Illinois, and it was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The physical training was relentless, the academic coursework was college level, and the psychological pressure was designed to eliminate anyone who lacked absolute commitment. But for Sarah, it was exactly what she had been searching for, a place where excellence was expected and weakness was not tolerated. Her instructor, Master Chief Petty Officer Jackson, was a 25-year SEAL veteran who had served in every major conflict since the Gulf War. He was skeptical about training female candidates for programs they couldn't officially enter, but he was also a professional who followed orders and evaluated performance objectively. Martinez, he said during her first week, you're here because someone thinks you have potential. I don't care about potential. I care about results. Show me what you can do. Sarah spent the next 6 months showing him exactly what she could do. She completed underwater demolition exercises that left grown men vomiting from exhaustion. She navigated survival scenarios that required her to evade capture for days while living off insects and rainwater. She mastered weapon systems that most infantry soldiers never touched, but the real test came during advanced tactical training, when candidates were required to plan and execute simulated combat missions under extreme stress. Sarah's team was assigned to rescue hostages from a fortified position while under simulated enemy fire. Previous teams had failed the exercise repeatedly, losing virtual hostages and team members to well-positioned defenders. Sarah studied the scenario for hours, mapping defensive positions, timing guard rotations, and identifying weaknesses in the enemy setup. When her team gathered for the mission briefing, she presented a plan that was so audacious it made her teammates nervous. We're going to walk through the front door, she explained, pointing to the main entrance of the facility, but not as attackers. We're going to convince them to let us in. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. Sarah would approach the facility alone, posing as a lost civilian who needed help. While the defenders were distracted by her presence, the rest of her team would infiltrate from multiple directions and neutralize threats before the hostages could be harmed. This is insane, muttered one of her teammates, a male sailor who had been skeptical of Sarah's presence in the program from the beginning. If they see through the deception, you'll be captured or killed immediately. Then I won't let them see through it, Sarah replied calmly. Master Chief Jackson watched the exercise unfold from the observation tower, communicating with instructors who were playing the role of enemy defenders. He had seen hundreds of tactical exercises, but he had never seen anything like what Sarah Martinez was attempting. She approached the facility's main gate, appearing frightened and confused, stumbling as if she had been walking for hours. The defenders, following realistic protocols for dealing with civilians in a combat zone, brought her inside for questioning. What they didn't realize was that Sarah was memorizing their positions, counting their weapons, and identifying their command structure, while pretending to be a helpless victim. When her team launched their coordinated assault exactly 3 minutes later, the defenders were completely unprepared. Sarah transformed from helpless civilian to lethal combatant in seconds, neutralizing 2 guards before they could raise an alarm. Her teammates swept through the facility like a hurricane, rescuing all hostages without a single casualty. The entire exercise took less than 8 minutes. Master Chief Jackson stared at his stopwatch in disbelief. The previous record for completing the scenario had been 20 to 3 minutes, and that team had lost half the hostages. Sarah's team had achieved total mission success in record time, using tactics that violated every conventional approach to the problem. "How did you know they would bring you inside?" Jackson asked during the debrief. "Because they're human," Sarah replied. "And humans have predictable responses to certain stimuli." They saw a young woman in distress, and their protective instincts overrode their tactical caution. Jackson studied her for a long moment. "You manipulated their psychology. I used their assumptions against them. They expected an attack from outside, so I gave them something that seemed harmless from inside." That night, Master Chief Jackson made a phone call to a contact at Naval Special Warfare Command. The conversation lasted over an hour, and by the end of it, Sarah's military career had taken another dramatic turn. She was selected for advanced intelligence training at the Naval War College, where she would study psychological operations, advanced tactics, and strategic planning. It wasn't SEAL training, but it was preparation for something potentially more important: becoming the kind of operator who could think 3 steps ahead of any enemy. The advanced program was intense beyond anything Sarah had previously experienced. She studied the psychology of warfare, learning how to predict enemy behavior and exploit cognitive biases. She mastered multiple languages and cultural studies that would allow her to operate effectively in any environment. Most importantly, she learned how to think like both predator and prey simultaneously. Her instructors were amazed by her natural ability to understand complex tactical situations and develop innovative solutions. Professor Williams, a former CIA operative who taught advanced psychological warfare, described Sarah as the most intuitive strategic thinker he had encountered in 20 years of teaching. "You have a gift for seeing patterns that others miss," he told her after a particularly challenging simulation exercise. "You understand that warfare is ultimately about human psychology, not just weapons and tactics." Sarah thrived in the academic environment, but she never forgot her ultimate goal. She wanted to be a warrior, not just a strategist. She continued her physical training religiously, maintained her marksmanship skills, and stayed current on weapon systems and tactical procedures. During her second year at the War College, everything changed. A female sailor named Lieutenant Sarah Johnson successfully completed Navy SEAL training as part of an experimental program, becoming the first woman to earn the Trident pin. The news sent shockwaves through the military community and opened doors that had been closed for generations. Within weeks of Johnson's graduation, Sarah received new orders. She was being transferred to Naval Special Warfare Command for evaluation as a SEAL candidate. The program was still experimental, and only a handful of women would be selected for the opportunity, but Sarah had earned her chance. The call came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Master Chief Jackson himself. "Pack your bags, Martinez," he said with a rare smile. "You're going to Coronado." Sarah felt her heart rate increase for the first time in months. Coronado, California, was home to basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, the most demanding military program in the world. It was where Navy SEALs were forged through months of physical and mental torture that eliminated all but the most exceptional candidates. "When do I leave?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow," Jackson replied. "And Martinez?" "Don't embarrass us." That night, Sarah called home to talk to her family. Her mother cried with pride when she heard the news, while Carlos and Maria peppered her with questions about what SEAL training would involve. But the conversation that mattered most was with Sergeant Rodriguez, her first combat instructor. "I knew this day would come," he said when she told him about her assignment to SEAL training. "You were meant for this from the beginning. It's going to be the hardest thing I've ever done," Sarah admitted. "Good," Rodriguez replied. "Easy things don't change you. Hard things forge you into who you're supposed to become." Sarah arrived at Coronado 2 days later and immediately understood why SEAL training had such a legendary reputation. The facility was beautiful, located on pristine beaches with perfect weather, but there was an atmosphere of controlled violence that permeated everything. This was where warriors were created through systematic destruction and rebuilding of human limits. Her class consisted of 43 candidates, including 3 other women who had been selected for the experimental program. The attrition rate for SEAL training typically exceeded 80%, meaning only 8 or 9 candidates would successfully complete the program. The first day began with a physical fitness test that eliminated 6 candidates immediately. Sarah passed easily, but she noticed that one of the other female candidates was already struggling with the swimming requirements. The psychological warfare began immediately afterward. "Look around you," shouted Instructor Chief Petty Officer Martinez, a SEAL veteran with 15 years of combat experience. "Most of you don't belong here. Some of you know it already." The rest we'll figure it out over the next 6 months. The training began with a phase designed to test physical endurance and mental resilience. Candidates were subjected to continuous physical exercise, sleep deprivation, cold water immersion, and constant psychological pressure from instructors who seemed determined to find breaking points in every person. Sarah discovered that her years of neighborhood survival training had prepared her for aspects of SEAL training that other candidates found devastating. When instructors tried to break her mentally by screaming insults and personal attacks, she remained calm and focused. When physical training pushed her body beyond normal human limits, she found reserves of strength built during years of protecting her family. But SEAL training was different from anything she had experienced before. It wasn't just about individual toughness. It was about functioning as part of a team under impossible conditions. Candidates who couldn't work together failed, regardless of their individual capabilities. The first major test came during Hell Week, a 5-day period of continuous training with minimal sleep and maximum physical stress. Candidates were required to complete obstacle courses, swimming exercises, boat races, and tactical scenarios while instructors maintained constant pressure designed to induce voluntary withdrawal from the program. By the third day of Hell Week, Sarah's class had shrunk from 43 candidates to 21. The attrition rate was higher than normal, partly because the experimental inclusion of female candidates had attracted additional media attention and scrutiny that created extra pressure on everyone involved. Sarah herself was struggling for the first time since arriving at Coronado. The sleep deprivation was affecting her cognitive function, and the cold Pacific Ocean was draining her body heat faster than she could generate it. During one particularly brutal boat exercise, she found herself questioning whether she had the physical strength to continue. That's when she remembered the threats that had driven her to join the military in the first place. Somewhere back in Phoenix, the people who had tried to intimidate her into submission were probably assuming she had given up and moved on. They had no idea that their threats had motivated her to seek training that would make her infinitely more dangerous than they could imagine. Sarah used that anger as fuel, pushing through the next 2 days of Hell Week with a determination that impressed even the hardened SEAL instructors. When the exercise finally ended, she was one of only 16 candidates remaining in the program. Chief Martinez pulled her aside after Hell Week for a private conversation. "You surprised me this week," he said bluntly. "I expected you to quit." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because you're the smallest candidate in the class, and this program was designed to break people twice your size." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Size doesn't matter if you refuse to quit." Martinez nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But understand this. Hell Week was just the beginning. The real training starts now." He was right. The next phase of SEAL training focused on combat diving, demolitions, and weapons training. Candidates learned to navigate underwater in complete darkness, set explosive charges with surgical precision, and engage targets accurately with a variety of weapons systems. Sarah excelled in the technical aspects of the training, but she struggled with one particular challenge: long-distance shooting. While she was an excellent marksman with rifles and pistols at normal ranges, the precision required for extreme distance shots demanded a level of patience and technique that she hadn't fully developed. The problem became apparent during sniper training, when candidates were required to engage targets at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Sarah could hit the targets, but her groupings were inconsistent, and she occasionally missed shots that other candidates made easily. Instructor Chief Warrant Officer Thompson, a former SEAL sniper with multiple combat tours, worked with Sarah privately to address the issue. "You're thinking too much," he explained as they analyzed her shooting patterns. Long-distance shooting is as much about mental discipline as physical technique. You need to trust your training and let your subconscious mind handle the calculations. Sarah spent weeks practicing meditation and breathing techniques designed to quiet her analytical mind during shooting exercises. Gradually, her accuracy improved, and she began to understand the almost mystical connection between shooter, weapon, and target that characterized elite snipers. The breakthrough came during a qualification exercise where candidates had to engage multiple targets at varying ranges under simulated combat conditions. Sarah found herself in a state of perfect focus, where time seemed to slow down and every shot felt predetermined. She engaged 12 targets in rapid succession, achieving perfect center mass hits on all of them. Chief Thompson watched through binoculars and shook his head in amazement. "That was some of the finest shooting I've seen from a candidate in 10 years. "It felt different," Sarah replied, still somewhat surprised by her own performance. "Like I wasn't thinking about the shots. I was just making them."
That's exactly right. You found your zone.
Now we need to make sure you can access it consistently under stress. The final phase of SEAL training focused on advanced tactics and small unit operations. End. candidates learned to plan and execute complex missions involving reconnaissance, direct action, and counter-terrorism. The exercises were designed to simulate real combat conditions as closely as possible. Sarah's strategic training at the War College proved invaluable during this phase. While other candidates focused on tactical execution, she excelled at mission planning and adaptability when operations didn't go according to plan. Her ability to think several moves ahead made her an exceptional team leader and strategic asset. The final exercise was a week-long field training event that required candidates to infiltrate enemy territory, gather intelligence, and neutralize high-value targets without being detected. It was the culmination of months of training, and failure meant immediate dismissal from the program. Sarah's team was assigned one of the most challenging scenarios, penetrating a heavily defended compound to capture a terrorist leader who had successfully evaded previous attempts. The target was protected by multiple layers of security, including electronic surveillance, guard patrols, and booby traps. Sarah studied the scenario for hours before proposing a plan that shocked her teammates and instructors. Instead of trying to infiltrate the compound covertly, she recommended a direct assault using psychological warfare to create confusion and panic among the defenders. "We're going to convince them that they're under attack by a much larger force," she explained. "While they're responding to multiple false threats, we'll penetrate their defenses and capture the target." The plan required precise timing and coordination, but it worked perfectly. Sarah's team created the illusion of a major assault while actually consisting of only 4 people. The defenders responded exactly as predicted, allowing the team to capture their target and escape without firing a shot. 6 months after arriving at Coronado, Sarah Martinez became one of only 7 candidates to successfully complete SEAL training. She was the first woman in her class to earn the Trident pin, and her instructors rated her performance as exceptional in every category. Chief Martinez delivered her graduation speech personally. "You came here as a sailor with potential," he said. "You're leaving as a weapon with a conscience. Use both wisely." Sarah's first assignment as a Navy SEAL would take her to Afghanistan, where American forces were engaged in some of the most challenging combat operations since World War II. But before deploying overseas, she had one personal mission to complete. She was going home to Phoenix for 2 weeks of leave, and she planned to deliver a message to the people who had tried to break her spirit with threats years earlier. They had created a monster, and it was time for them to meet their creation face to face. The Phoenix airport looked exactly the same. But Sarah Martinez was a completely different person than the teenager who had left for military service 3 years earlier. She moved through the terminal with the fluid awareness of a trained predator, her eyes automatically cataloging exits, potential threats, and defensive positions. The Navy SEAL Trident pin on her dress uniform drew curious glances from travelers who had no idea they were looking at one of the most lethal warriors in the American military. Carlos and Maria were waiting at the baggage claim, and Sarah felt her carefully controlled emotions surge when she saw how much they had grown. Carlos was now 18 and built like a linebacker, while Maria had transformed from a little girl into a poised young woman of 15. But what struck Sarah most was the confidence in their eyes, a fearlessness that hadn't been there when she left. "Look at you," Carlos said, embracing his sister and staring at her uniform with obvious pride. "You actually did it. You became a SEAL." "How does it feel to be a real-life superhero?" Maria asked, her voice mixing admiration with genuine curiosity. Sarah smiled, but her response was measured. "It feels like responsibility. Every day." The drive through their old neighborhood was surreal. Sarah recognized the streets and landmarks, but she was seeing everything through new eyes, trained to assess tactical situations and identify potential ambush points. What had once seemed like an inescapable urban maze now looked like a series of manageable tactical problems. Their mother, Elena, had prepared a feast that could have fed 20 people. She fussed over Sarah like she was still a teenager, but she also kept staring at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern that only mothers can master. "You look different," Elena observed as they sat around the kitchen table that had been the center of their family conferences for years. "Stronger, but also harder." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I've seen things that changed me, Mum, but the core of who I am, the values you taught me, those haven't changed. Have you?" Elena's voice trailed off, unable to finish the question about whether her daughter had killed people in combat. "I've done my job," Sarah replied gently but firmly. "And I've done it well." Over the next few days, Sarah reacquainted herself with a neighborhood that was both familiar and strange. The physical geography hadn't changed much, but the power dynamics had shifted dramatically in her absence. The Serpientes gang had been absorbed by a larger criminal organization, Drug trafficking had become more sophisticated and violent, and several local businesses had closed due to extortion and intimidation. But there were positive changes too. Sergeant Rodriguez had expanded his community self-defense program, and several dozen local residents now possessed basic combat skills. The playground where Sarah had first confronted the serpientes had been converted into a community garden maintained by neighborhood volunteers. Most importantly, there was a sense of resilience among the residents that hadn't existed when Sarah left. People fight back now, Carlos explained as they walked through the area. After you stood up to the gangs, others started standing up too. It's still dangerous, but it's not hopeless anymore. Sarah nodded, but she was also gathering intelligence on current threats and assessing how much the situation had actually improved. Her trained eye caught details that civilian residents might miss. New graffiti tags indicating territorial disputes, subtle signs of drug activity, and the nervous behavior of people who were still living in fear. On her fourth day home, the message she had been expecting finally arrived. She was visiting Rodriguez at the community center when a young boy, maybe 10 years old, approached with obvious reluctance. He handed Sarah a folded piece of paper and ran away without saying a word. "Welcome home, soldier girl," the note read. "You look good in uniform. It will make a nice funeral outfit. Some people never learn their place."
Rodriguez read the note over Sarah's shoulder and cursed in Spanish. "These bastards don't know when to quit."
Sarah stared at the paper for a long moment, remembering all the previous threats that had motivated her to seek military training.
The handwriting was different, but the arrogance was identical. Someone was still operating under the assumption that intimidation would work on her. "They're about to receive an education," she said quietly. That evening, Sarah began conducting surveillance on her old neighborhood with the systematic thoroughness of a professional intelligence operative. She mapped current gang territories, identified leadership structures, and documented patterns of criminal activity that local police either couldn't detect or chose to ignore. What she discovered was more sophisticated than the random street violence she remembered from her teenage years. The current criminal organization operated with military-style discipline and organization. They had established protection rackets for local businesses, controlled drug distribution through a network of street-level dealers, and used systematic intimidation to maintain control over residents who might otherwise cooperate with law enforcement. But Sarah also identified weaknesses in their operation. Like most criminal organizations, they relied heavily on fear and reputation rather than actual tactical capability. Their leadership was concentrated in a few key individuals who made themselves visible to maintain their authority. Most importantly, they had grown complacent over the years, assuming that their control was permanent and unchallenged. Sarah spent a week gathering information before making her first move. She chose her target carefully. A mid-level enforcer named Diego Morales, who was responsible for collecting protection money from local businesses and disciplining residents who failed to show proper respect to the organization. Morales had a routine that made him predictable. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, he collected money from a series of small businesses along the main commercial strip. He traveled alone, relying on his reputation and the assumption that no one would dare challenge him directly. On a Thursday evening in November, Morales was walking back to his car after completing his collection rounds when he noticed someone following him. He turned around expecting to see a customer or perhaps a rival gang member, but instead found himself face-to-face with a young woman in military fatigues. "Diego Morales," Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that made him pause despite himself. "Do I know you?" Morales asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon concealed under his jacket. "You should. You and your friends have been sending me love letters for the past week." Understanding dawned in Morales' eyes, followed immediately by calculation. He was bigger than this woman, probably stronger, and he was armed. But something about her posture and the way she held herself made him hesitate. "You're the Martinez girl, the one who joined the army." "Navy," Sarah corrected. "And I didn't join. I volunteered for the most elite military unit in the world. I'm a Navy SEAL now." Morales laughed, but it sounded forced. "So what? You think a uniform makes you bulletproof?" "I think training makes me bulletproof. Against people like you, anyway." What happened next became another neighborhood legend, though this time there were no witnesses except security cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned during the critical moments. According to Morales himself, who told the story repeatedly over the following weeks, Sarah Martinez moved like something inhuman. She disarmed him before he could draw his weapon, broke 2 of his fingers to ensure he couldn't use a gun effectively for several weeks, and delivered a message that left no room for misinterpretation.
"The protection racket ends now," she told him, as he lay on the ground trying to process what had just happened.
The intimidation ends now. The threats against my family and my neighbors end now. You can't protect everyone, Morales gasped, clutching his damaged hand. You'll go back to the military, and things will return to normal. Sarah knelt down beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than shouting. I'm deploying to Afghanistan next month. I'll be hunting terrorists who are better armed, better trained, and more dangerous than anyone in this neighborhood. When I come home, if I discover that anyone has been hurt because of your organization's activities, I will hold you personally responsible. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. You should also know that I've documented everything about your operation. Financial records, leadership structure, criminal activities, even your personal routines and vulnerabilities. All of that information is currently stored in multiple secure locations, with instructions for release if anything happens to me or my family. Morales stared at her in growing horror. You're bluffing. Sarah pulled out a folder and dropped it next to his head. It contained photographs, financial documents, and detailed intelligence reports about his organization that could only have been compiled by someone with professional training and resources. I'm a Navy SEAL, she reminded him. Gathering actionable intelligence on enemy targets is part of my job description. She stood up and looked down at him with something approaching pity. You have two choices. You can accept that the balance of power in this neighborhood has shifted permanently, or you can continue operating under the delusion that intimidation and violence are effective tools against someone who has been professionally trained to neutralize threats. Sarah walked away, leaving Morales to contemplate his situation and examine the intelligence files she had compiled. The photographs alone were enough to send several organization leaders to prison for decades, while the financial records could trigger federal investigations that would destroy their entire operation. Word of the confrontation spread through the criminal community within hours, but the public version of events was carefully controlled. Sarah had made it clear that she preferred to resolve problems quietly, without media attention or police involvement that might complicate her military career. Over the next week, several interesting developments occurred in the neighborhood. Protection payments stopped being collected from local businesses, drug dealing became much more discreet, and moved away from areas where families with children lived. Most significantly, the anonymous threats that had been directed at Sarah and her family stopped arriving entirely. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with merely addressing immediate symptoms. She wanted to create lasting changes that would protect the community long after she deployed to combat zones on the other side of the world. She began working with Sergeant Rodriguez and other community leaders to establish a formal neighborhood watch program with real teeth. Using her intelligence training, she taught volunteer coordinators how to document criminal activity systematically, how to share information safely with law enforcement, and how to protect themselves while gathering intelligence on threats. You're creating a counterintelligence network, Rodriguez observed as they reviewed training materials for the volunteer coordinators. I'm creating accountability, Sarah replied. Criminal organizations rely on operating in darkness. When you shine light on their activities consistently and professionally, they lose their primary advantage. Sarah also used her military contacts to arrange for enhanced police patrols in the area and improved cooperation between local law enforcement and federal agencies investigating organized crime. Her status as a decorated Navy SEAL gave her access to resources and personnel that civilian community activists could never reach. But the most important change Sarah implemented was psychological. She made it clear through word and action that the residents of her neighborhood were under the protection of someone with the training and authority to make good on promises of retaliation. Criminal organizations could intimidate civilians, but they had no effective response to a professionally trained special operations warrior who possessed both legal authority and lethal capabilities. The message was reinforced 2 weeks before Sarah's deployment, when another confrontation occurred outside the community center. This time, 3 mid-level criminals approached Rodriguez directly, demanding that he shut down the self-defense classes and neighborhood watch programs that were interfering with their operations. Sarah happened to be inside the building when the confrontation began, but she observed the entire interaction through security cameras before deciding to intervene. The 3 men were armed and aggressive, making threats against Rodriguez personally and against community members who continued to participate in programs that challenged criminal authority. When Sarah emerged from the community center, the dynamic of the confrontation changed instantly. The 3 men found themselves facing someone who moved with predatory confidence and showed no sign of fear or intimidation. "Gentlemen," Sarah said politely, her hands relaxed at her sides but her posture indicating readiness for immediate violence. "I believe you're lost."
"This doesn't concern you, soldier girl," said the apparent leader, a man in his 30s with gang tattoos and obvious weapon concealment.
Walk away while you still can. Sarah smiled, but it was the cold expression of a predator who had just identified prey. Actually, this concerns me very much. These programs you want to shut down? I created them. The people you're threatening? They're under my protection. 3 against 1, the leader replied, his confidence returning as he did the math. Good, Sarah said. Finally, a fair fight. What followed was a clinic in applied violence that left all 3 men unconscious or incapacitated within 90 seconds. Sarah used minimal force, carefully avoiding permanent injuries. But the demonstration was effective enough to ensure the message would spread through the criminal community. Rodriguez watched the entire encounter with professional interest. You didn't even break a sweat. They weren't trained, Sarah replied, checking the men's weapons and finding exactly what she expected: cheap handguns that hadn't been properly maintained. They relied on intimidation because they don't actually know how to fight. That incident marked the end of direct challenges to the community programs Sarah had established. Criminal organizations began avoiding the neighborhood entirely, recognizing that the cost of operations had become prohibitively high. On her last night home before deploying to Afghanistan, Sarah sat on the roof of their apartment building with Carlos and Maria, looking out over a neighborhood that had been transformed in ways both visible and invisible. "Are you worried about going to war?" Maria asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I'm worried about doing my job well. I'm worried about protecting my teammates and completing our mission successfully. But I'm not worried about myself." "Why not?" Carlos asked. Sarah gestured toward the streets below, where children were playing in areas that had been controlled by criminals just months earlier. "Because I've already fought my war. Everything else is just advanced training." She deployed to Afghanistan 3 days later, carrying with her the knowledge that her family and community were safer than they had been in years. But she also carried something else: the understanding that her true calling wasn't just fighting America's enemies overseas, but protecting the innocent from predators wherever they might be found. The threats that had once been designed to break her spirit had instead forged her into exactly the kind of warrior the world needed. And her war was just beginning. Afghanistan hit Sarah Martinez like a physical blow the moment she stepped off the transport plane at Bagram Airfield. The thin air, blazing sun, and smell of diesel fuel mixed with ancient dust created an environment unlike anything she had experienced, even during the harshest SEAL training exercises. But what struck her most was the constant underlying tension that permeated everything, the awareness that danger could emerge from any direction at any moment. Chief Petty Officer Mike Thunder Thompson, her team leader, met her at the aircraft with the expression of a man who had seen too much combat in too many places. He was a 15-year SEAL veteran with multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and his reputation for keeping his people alive was legendary throughout the special operations community. "Welcome to the sandbox, Martinez," he said, shaking her hand with a grip that tested her strength. "Hope you're ready to put all that training to work." "Ready, Chief?" Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact and matching his grip pressure exactly. Thompson studied her for a moment, taking in her confident posture and alert awareness of their surroundings. "Good, because we're not here to play games. We hunt bad guys who kill Americans, and we don't come home until they're all dead or captured." Sarah's SEAL team consisted of 8 operators, each with specialized skills that complemented the others. Besides Thompson, there was Senior Chief Dan Bulldog Rodriguez, a demolitions expert who could make explosives out of household chemicals. Petty Officer First Class Jake Spider Williams, a communications specialist who could hack enemy networks in real time, and Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Doc Johnson, a combat medic who had saved more lives under fire than anyone could count. The remaining team members were experienced warriors who had served multiple combat deployments together, creating the kind of unit cohesion that could mean the difference between life and death in combat situations. Sarah was the newest addition to a team that had been operating together for over 2 years. "She's going to have to prove herself," Thompson explained to the team during their first briefing. "I don't care what her training records say. Combat is different from exercises, and Afghanistan is different from anywhere else on Earth." Their first mission came within 48 hours of Sarah's arrival. Intelligence had identified a Taliban commander named Hashim Kamal, who was responsible for coordinating attacks against American supply convoys. Kamal was operating from a fortified compound in a remote mountain valley, surrounded by loyal fighters and protected by terrain that made conventional assault extremely difficult. The mission called for a small team insertion via helicopter, followed by a multi-day surveillance operation to gather intelligence on Kamal's activities and security measures. If an opportunity presented itself, They were authorized to capture or eliminate the target, but intelligence gathering was the primary objective. Sarah's role was designated as sniper and intelligence analyst, positioning her to provide overwatch for the team while documenting enemy movements and communications. It was a critical assignment that would test both her technical skills and her ability to remain calm under sustained pressure. The helicopter insertion took place before dawn, with the team fast roping into a landing zone 6 kilometers from their target location. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as they touched down in hostile territory for the first time, but her training kicked in immediately, and she moved with the fluid efficiency of a professional operator. The approach to their observation position required 12 hours of movement through terrain that challenged even experienced mountain fighters. Sarah carried her sniper rifle, specialized optics, communications equipment, and enough food and water to sustain operations for up to a week. The total weight exceeded 70 pounds, but she kept pace with her teammates without complaint or assistance. "She's keeping up," Thompson observed to Rodriguez as they paused during a particularly difficult climb. "So far," Rodriguez replied, "but we haven't been shot at yet." Their observation post was established in a natural cave formation that provided concealment while offering clear lines of sight to the target compound 800 meters away. Sarah set up her sniper system with methodical precision, adjusting for altitude, temperature, and wind conditions that would affect long-distance accuracy. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving through the compound with the casual confidence of people who believed they were safe from American retaliation. She counted personnel, documented weapons positions, and noted tactical vulnerabilities that could be exploited if an assault became necessary. "Target compound has approximately 25 fighters," she reported to Thompson during their first intelligence update. Primary building is a traditional mud brick construction with reinforced walls. Secondary structures include weapon storage, vehicle maintenance, and what appears to be a communications facility. Thompson reviewed her sketches and photographs with professional approval. "Good work. Keep watching and learning." Over the next 3 days, Sarah maintained surveillance on the compound while her teammates gathered intelligence from other sources. She documented daily routines, identified key personnel, and tracked movement patterns that revealed the enemy's operational procedures. But on the 4th day, everything changed. Sarah was conducting her normal morning observation when she noticed unusual activity in the compound. Fighters were moving with purpose rather than following their established routines, and several vehicles were being prepared for immediate departure. "Chief," she reported over their communication system, "I'm seeing significant changes in target behavior. Looks like they're preparing to move." Thompson joined her at the observation position and studied the compound through his own optics. "Damn." Someone tipped them off. "They know we're here." As if to confirm his assessment, Taliban fighters began moving toward the ridgeline where the SEAL team had established their position. The enemy wasn't conducting a random patrol, they were executing a deliberate search operation designed to locate and eliminate American forces. "Time to go," Thompson decided. "Pack it up and prepare for immediate extraction." But as the team prepared to abandon their position, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through her scope, she could see American prisoners being loaded into one of the vehicles preparing to depart the compound. 3 soldiers, all showing signs of abuse and torture, were being transferred under heavy guard. "Chief," Sarah called urgently, "we have American prisoners in the compound. They're loading them into vehicles now." Thompson cursed and moved to confirm her observation. Through the scope, he could see what Sarah had spotted: 3 American soldiers, who had obviously been captured and held prisoner by Taliban forces. "How long until they move?" Thompson asked. 5 minutes maximum," Sarah replied, tracking the enemy's preparations through her scope. Thompson faced an impossible decision. His team was outnumbered 5-1 and surrounded by enemy forces who were actively hunting them. Attempting to rescue the prisoners would likely result in casualties among his own team, with no guarantee of success. But abandoning American prisoners to Taliban torture and probable execution violated every principle he had sworn to uphold. "Martinez," he said finally, "can you take the shot?" Sarah understood immediately what he was asking. The Taliban commander, Hashim Kamal, was visible in the compound courtyard, directing the movement of prisoners and preparing his escape. If she could eliminate him with a precision shot, it might create enough confusion to disrupt the enemy's plans and potentially create an opportunity for prisoner rescue. 800 meters downhill shot, wind from the northwest at approximately 10 miles per hour, Sarah replied, running calculations in her mind. "I can make the shot. Take it." Sarah settled into her firing position and began the meditation process that transformed her from a human being into a precision instrument of war. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate decreased, and her conscious mind stepped aside to allow pure instinct and training to control her movements. Through her scope, Hashim Kamal appeared larger than life, directing his fighters with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. He had no idea that 800 meters away, a Navy SEAL sniper was calculating wind drift, bullet drop, and target movement with mathematical precision. Sarah's finger found the trigger, and she felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that characterized her best shooting. The shot had to be perfect. There would be no second chance. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she watched through her scope as the bullet traveled across 800 meters of Afghan mountain air to find its target with surgical precision. Hashim Kamal collapsed instantly, killed by a shot that removed him from the battlefield permanently and created exactly the confusion Thompson had hoped for. Taliban fighters throughout the compound began shouting and running in all directions, trying to understand where the shot had originated while securing their positions against further attack. In the chaos, the guards responsible for the American prisoners momentarily lost focus on their duties. "That's our window," Thompson decided. "Spider, call for immediate air support and extraction. Bulldog, prepare charges for the weapons storage facility. Doc, get ready to treat wounded prisoners. We're going in." What followed was a textbook special operations assault that demonstrated why Navy SEALs were considered the elite of American military forces. The team moved down the mountainside like wolves, using terrain and surprise to overcome superior enemy numbers. Sarah provided sniper support throughout the assault, eliminating sentries and key threats with precision shots that cleared the way for her teammates' advance. Her accuracy under combat stress was phenomenal. Every shot found its target, and every target was permanently neutralized. The assault on the compound lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours to Sarah as she tracked multiple targets through her scope, while coordinating with team members who were advancing under enemy fire. She felt a strange combination of crystal-clear focus and heightened awareness that allowed her to process multiple tactical situations simultaneously. "Sniper, we need suppression fire on the north wall," Thompson called over their communication system as his element encountered heavy resistance. Sarah shifted her aim and engaged 3 Taliban fighters who were attempting to flank her teammate's position. All 3 shots were lethal, eliminating the threat in seconds and allowing Thompson's advance to continue. "Building secure," Rodriguez reported as the team reached the prisoner's location. "We have 3 American POWs, alive but in poor condition. The rescued prisoners were soldiers from an army unit that had been captured during an ambush 2 weeks earlier. They had been tortured and interrogated, but they were alive and would survive their ordeal thanks to the SEAL team's intervention." Sarah continued providing overwatch as her teammates prepared the prisoners for extraction while destroying enemy weapons and intelligence materials. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction watching American soldiers being carried to safety, knowing that her shot had initiated the chain of events that led to their rescue. The helicopter extraction arrived 20 minutes later, preceded by air support that eliminated remaining Taliban resistance in the area. As they lifted off from the compound, Sarah could see the results of their mission. Enemy fighters dead or scattered, weapons facilities destroyed, and most importantly, 3 American soldiers returning home to their families.
Outstanding work, Thompson told the team during their debrief.
"That was a textbook operation from start to finish. Martinez," he said, looking directly at Sarah, "that was one hell of a shot. 800 meters, combat conditions, perfect target elimination. You just announced your arrival in Afghanistan." Over the following months, Sarah's reputation as a sniper spread throughout the special operations community. She participated in dozens of missions, ranging from direct action raids to long-term surveillance operations, always performing with the precision and reliability that characterized elite warriors. Her longest confirmed kill came during a mission to eliminate a bomb maker who was responsible for improvised explosive devices that had killed dozens of American soldiers. The target was located in a village compound that couldn't be assaulted without significant civilian casualties, requiring a precision shot from extreme range. Sarah set up her position on a mountainside overlooking the village, calculating a shot distance of 1,247 meters across, challenging terrain with variable wind conditions. The target appeared briefly in a window, presenting a firing opportunity that lasted less than 3 seconds. The shot traveled for over a second before finding its target with devastating accuracy. The bomb maker was eliminated instantly, and subsequent raids on his facility recovered enough explosive materials to construct hundreds of improvised bombs. "That shot just saved American lives that we'll never even know about," Thompson told her afterward. But Sarah's most significant combat action came during her 8th month in Afghanistan, when her team was assigned to rescue a captured CIA operative who was being held in a Taliban stronghold that had resisted multiple previous assault attempts. The mission required a complex multi-team operation involving helicopter insertion, coordinated ground assault, and precision sniper support to eliminate key targets while minimizing American casualties. Sarah was positioned as the primary sniper, responsible for neutralizing enemy leaders and providing overwatch for the assault teams. The compound was heavily fortified and defended by experienced Taliban fighters who had prepared for American assault tactics. Previous rescue attempts had failed due to the enemy's defensive positions and their willingness to execute prisoners rather than allow them to be rescued. Sarah established her position before dawn, settling into a concealed location that provided clear lines of sight to multiple target areas. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving through positions that had been prepared with interlocking fields of fire and natural defensive advantages. The assault began at sunrise, with helicopter-borne teams fast roping into multiple landing zones around the compound. Sarah's role was to eliminate specific targets whose removal would create gaps in the enemy's defensive plan. Her first shot eliminated a heavy machine gun position that commanded the primary assault route. The second shot neutralized a sniper who was targeting American helicopters. The third shot killed the Taliban commander who was coordinating the defense from a central courtyard. Each shot was calculated under combat stress while tracking multiple targets and coordinating with assault teams who were advancing under heavy enemy fire. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of time dilation that allowed her to process complex tactical situations with superhuman clarity. "Sniper, we need immediate suppression on Building 3, came the urgent call from one of the assault teams that had become pinned down by enemy fire. Sarah shifted her aim and engaged multiple targets in rapid succession, clearing defensive positions that had been stopping the American advance. Her shooting was so accurate and devastating that surviving Taliban fighters began abandoning their positions rather than face continued sniper fire. The rescue operation succeeded with minimal American casualties, and the CIA operative was recovered alive. But more importantly, the mission established Sarah's reputation as one of the most effective combat snipers in the American military. "I've worked with special operations snipers for 15 years, the rescued CIA operative told Thompson during his debrief. "I've never seen shooting like that under combat conditions. She's not just accurate, she's an artist." By the end of her deployment, Sarah had recorded 47 confirmed kills and participated in over 60 combat operations. She had been awarded the Bronze Star for Valor, the Purple Heart for wounds received during a Taliban ambush, and the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during the CIA rescue mission. But more than the decorations and recognition, Sarah had discovered her true calling. She was a warrior who excelled at protecting the innocent and eliminating threats that endangered American lives. The threats that had driven her to seek military training had transformed her into exactly the kind of person the world needed to fight its battles against evil. As her plane lifted off from Bagram Airfield for the journey home, Sarah looked down at the Afghan landscape where she had been tested and proven in combat. She was returning to the United States as a decorated war veteran with skills and experience that made her one of the most dangerous people on Earth. The men who had tried to break her spirit with threats years earlier had created their own nemesis, and she was coming home. Sarah Martinez returned from Afghanistan carrying more than just military decorations and combat experience. She carried the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested in the crucible of war and emerged stronger than steel. The plane touched down at San Diego International Airport on a warm Tuesday morning in September, and Sarah felt a complex mixture of relief and anticipation as she prepared to transition from combat veteran to civilian life. Her transition leave would last 30 days before she reported to her new assignment with Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the most elite SEAL unit in the American military. But first, she had personal business to attend to in Phoenix. The neighborhood that had shaped her was about to meet the warrior it had created. Carlos and Maria met her at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, and Sarah was struck immediately by how much they had matured during her deployment. Carlos had started college on a full academic scholarship, while Maria was excelling in high school and considering military service herself. Both carried themselves with the confidence that came from living without fear. "The neighborhood's different now," Carlos explained as they drove through familiar streets. "Word got around about what you did before you deployed. People aren't afraid anymore." Sarah observed the changes through new eyes trained by months of combat experience. The streets that had once seemed threatening now appeared manageable, almost quaint, compared to the genuine dangers she had faced in Afghanistan. But she also noticed subtler signs of improvement: children playing in areas that had been gang territory, small businesses that were thriving without paying protection money, and residents who moved with the confidence of people who no longer lived in fear. Rodriguez wants to see you, Maria said. He's got big news about the community center. They found Sergeant Rodriguez in his office, surrounded by expansion plans and architectural drawings. He embraced Sarah with the pride of a mentor whose student had exceeded all expectations. Look at you, he said, studying her with professional appreciation. You left here as a warrior in training. You've come back as a weapon of war. How can you tell? Sarah asked. Rodriguez pointed to details that only another combat veteran would notice. The way she automatically positioned herself to observe exits, her relaxed awareness of potential threats, and most tellingly, the absolute stillness she maintained when not in motion.
You move like a predator now, he explained.
Before Afghanistan, you were dangerous to criminals and bullies. Now you're dangerous to anyone who threatens what you protect. He showed her the expansion plans with obvious excitement. The community center was being enlarged to include advanced training facilities, a computer lab for educational programs, and meeting rooms for neighborhood organizations. Most importantly, it would house a formal community security program that coordinated with local law enforcement and federal agencies. All of this happened because you proved that people could fight back effectively, Rodriguez explained. Your example inspired others to take action, and now we have resources we never could have imagined. Sarah studied the plans with tactical appreciation, noting how the new facility could serve as a command center for neighborhood security operations while also providing legitimate community services. It was exactly the kind of dual-purpose facility that special operations teams established in hostile territories.
This is impressive, she said.
But I'm guessing you didn't just want to show me building plans. Rodriguez smiled grimly. You're right. We've got a problem that requires your particular expertise. He explained that while local criminal activity had decreased dramatically, a new threat had emerged from outside the neighborhood. A sophisticated criminal organization with connections to international drug trafficking had attempted to establish operations in the power vacuum left by the previous gang's departure. They're not street thugs, Rodriguez warned. These people are professionals with military training, advanced weapons, and connections to corruption networks that reach into law enforcement and government agencies. Sarah felt her combat instincts activate as Rodriguez described the new threat. These weren't the small-time criminals she had dealt with before leaving for the military. They represented the kind of organized threat that required careful planning and precise execution to neutralize. What do they want? She asked. Control. They need a secure base of operations for moving drugs and weapons through the region. This neighborhood represents valuable territory because of its location and transportation access. Rodriguez pulled out a folder containing photographs and intelligence reports that surprised Sarah with their professional quality. Someone had conducted serious surveillance on the new criminal organization, documenting their leadership structure, operational methods, and tactical capabilities. Who compiled this? She asked. Recognizing intelligence products that met military standards? You did, Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. The methods you taught our community security volunteers before you deployed. They've been watching and documenting everything. Sarah reviewed the intelligence with growing respect for what the neighborhood residents had accomplished. They had created an effective intelligence network that could rival professional law enforcement capabilities, all based on techniques she had adapted from her military training. They're good, she admitted, studying photographs that showed clear evidence of criminal activity and network connections. But this level of organization means they're also extremely dangerous. That's why we need you, Rodriguez said directly. The police can't touch them because they have corruption protection. Federal agencies can't get enough evidence for prosecution because these people are careful and professional. But they've made one critical mistake, which is, they tried to intimidate your family. Rodriguez handed her a final photograph that made Sarah's blood turn cold. It showed Carlos walking to his college campus, taken with professional equipment from a concealed position. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a message in the same style as the threats she had received years earlier. Tell your sister that some lessons need to be taught in person. Sarah stared at the photograph for a long moment, feeling familiar anger building in her chest. These people had made the same fundamental error as their predecessors. They had threatened her family while assuming that intimidation would work on someone who had been professionally trained to eliminate threats. When did this arrive? She asked, her voice carrying a deadly quiet that Rodriguez recognized from their early training sessions. 3 days ago. Carlos doesn't know about it yet. Sarah studied the photograph again, this time analyzing it with the skills of a combat intelligence specialist. The angle and lighting revealed information about the surveillance position, while the photographic quality suggested expensive equipment operated by someone with professional training. "They're watching the family to get to me," she concluded, "which means they've done research on my background and military service." "Probably," Rodriguez agreed. "But Sarah, these aren't gang members you can intimidate into leaving. They're professionals who will escalate to lethal force if they perceive you as a serious threat." Sarah looked up from the photograph with an expression that made Rodriguez step back instinctively. In that moment, he saw not the teenager he had trained years earlier, but a decorated combat veteran who had killed enemy fighters at extreme range under battlefield conditions. "Good," she said. "I was hoping for a real challenge." Over the next week, Sarah conducted surveillance on the new criminal organization with the systematic thoroughness of a special operations intelligence specialist. She identified their operational base, documented their personnel and equipment, and mapped their security procedures with military precision. What she discovered confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. These were dangerous professionals who operated with discipline and sophistication. They maintained counter-surveillance procedures, used encrypted communications, and had established defensive positions that would challenge even experienced assault teams. But Sarah also identified critical vulnerabilities in their operation. Like most criminal organizations, they relied heavily on predictable routines to maintain operational security. They had established patterns of movement and communication that could be exploited by someone with the patience and skill to conduct long-term surveillance. Most importantly, they had made the mistake of establishing a centralized command structure that made their leadership vulnerable to precision targeting. If Sarah could eliminate key personnel at the right moment, she could collapse their entire local operation. The opportunity came during the second week of her surveillance, when she discovered that the organization's leadership would be meeting at their operational base to discuss expansion plans. Intelligence indicated that all primary targets would be present in a single location with minimal security because they believed their position was secure. Sarah spent 3 days planning her approach with the methodical care that characterized special operations missions. She studied the target building from multiple angles, timed security patrols, and identified escape routes that would allow her to neutralize the threat and disappear before law enforcement arrived.